Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock, and welcome to another edition of Sabbath Sunday. This is where we get together on Sundays to discuss all things Black Sabbath. I'm here again with my Sabbath Sunday co-host, Darren. We also have a podcast, Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast. I'll leave a link to that below in the description. And the topic for today's episode is our picks for the 5 heaviest Black Sabbath songs. Not easy to do. Black Sabbath, tons of great riffs, tons of heavy songs. But we thought we would see if we could come up with what are our personal 5 heaviest Black Sabbath riffs. So, all right, Darren, welcome back to Sabbath Sunday. And I want to kick us off with your number 5 pick, your heaviest Sabbath song.
Yeah, so coming in at number 5, I have Megalomania from Sabotage. Comes in at number 5, even though it's pretty heavy tune, but it comes in last on the list because it takes about 3.5 minutes before it really starts getting up to speed. But once it does, man, it slams into things, and it's got that really killer Iommi riff, and just overall, it's probably one of the heavier tracks off of Sabotage. Yeah, so Sabotage in general is probably one of the heaviest Sabbath albums if you were to compare them. Maybe Volume 4 might give it some stiff competition, but of the content on Sabotage, I would say Megalomania is my number 1 heavy tune from that album.
Yeah, definitely one of their heavier albums from the 70s, probably the heaviest all-around album. Okay, my number 5 is Letters from Earth from Dehumanizer. That opening, the album in general is pretty dark and pretty heavy. You know, it's something that Dio would continue with into Strange Highways and Angry Machines. And I always thought that song, that opening riff, it has kind of a snowblind, like climbing up, you know, type of feel to it. And the verse, it's just heavy, man. And the chorus of the song was that letters from, dun, 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 you know, me chugging on the low string. And it's the overall tone of that whole album is just really dark and really heavy. And that particular one to me just always had a big, heavy, crushing vibe to it. Throw Vinny Appice and on drums on it. And it just, you know, it's just a monstrous riff and just a really heavy song from a pretty heavy album. So that's my number 5, Letters from Earth.
Cool. Well, for number 4, picking up where you left off with Dehumanizer, my number 4 is I almost that was one of the songs from Dehumanizer that hit me. I mean, I fell in love with the album probably the first time I listened to it, but I was just like blown away by it. Was the musical content is really heavy, but also the lyrical content probably a little bit different for Dio. Dio is usually a little bit more, I wouldn't say eloquent because it is an eloquent song, but he's a little bit more suggestive as far as some of the aggressive topics that he might get into. This one was really very direct, and that coupled with the music, I thought was one of the more heavy songs off the album. So yeah, number 4 for me is I
almost picked that one too, because I've always loved that one, especially Dio's vocal delivery in it.
Yeah.
Like, I am monster, I am. That's just fantastic.
Good stuff, yeah.
All right, so my number 4, I've always sort of, these 2 songs felt similar to me. And this is kind of why I didn't put I on my list, because I went with my next one is Zero the Hero from Born Again. And it has that same kind of chugging, robotic, slow moving, monstrous riff to it. And when it's Geezer with some sort of effect on his bass, it sounds like a bell, almost like boom, 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 you know, just do, 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 and just that rolling kind of chugging riff. And even when Iommi's solo comes in, it's kind of like distant and just real sort of creepy, and it has this hypnotic like groove to it. It's just really thick, like, a tank rolling through like a muddy field or something. It's just a very bulldozer like riff and song. So that's my pick for number 4 is Zero the Hero from Born Again.
Okay, so just slightly higher than your number 4. Zero the Hero comes in at number 3 for me. Compiling the heaviest Sabbath tunes, man, I couldn't leave Zero the Hero off the list. And of course, we've discussed Born Again ad nauseum now through different segments on video and also through our podcast. So there's no need to get into the whole production aspect or the mix or any of the things that would otherwise be the topic for discussion or the drawbacks from this album, because it really works on Zero the Hero. It has a murky quality, but it does build into an atmosphere on Zero the Hero. And like you mentioned, I agree with everything you said. Geezer's bass is just really, it's killer. That bell sound, just like, what is that? It just builds the song really has a life of its own. When you can't figure out how some of these sounds are being made, just really heavy, that's the sign that this is definitely taking on. It's like a monster of a song. So Zero the Hero, it's definitely one of my top 4 songs off of Born Again. But in general, it's also obviously one of my top 5 heaviest Black Sabbath songs of all time.
Yeah, and the way the song fades in too is just awesome. The way it fades in out of the dark, right? Is the instrumental before
the
it.
Dark,
Yeah, it's just so like ominous and creepy the way it, love it. Okay, my number 3 is Into the Void from Master of Reality. That verse riff, when the way the song starts, that riff in the beginning is heavy, but has a little bit of a swingish feel to it. And then when all of a sudden it stops and Iommi is da, 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 that is just so ominous, so heavy. The lyrical subject matter of destroying the earth, exiting the earth after its destruction. Geezer's apocalyptic lyrics at some of their best, and it's just such a heavy song. And the spot in the song where it is bomb, 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 and he's doing like the guitar fills in between. That is just so cool, man. So heavy, and awesome way to end that album. Great album closer. So number 3 for me, Into the Void from Master of Reality.
That is a great song. When I first got Master of Reality, I'm going to say early 80s, that was one of the songs I listened to over and over and over again. I just love that. I don't know if you'd call it staccato riff, the dan, da, 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 and then the way Ozzy's voice just sort of went right along with the riff, which in some cases it's kind of like a boring solution to a song, to a melody, but it really works well. It's like it really emphasizes the whole staccato vibe of that song. So yeah, that's a great pick. That's didn't make my top 5, but it would definitely be my top 10. So number 2 for me is The Namesake, title of the first album, Black Sabbath. I mean, wow. 1970. I mean, was there anything as heavy as that? I haven't heard it. I mean, I listened to a lot of obscure stuff from the 70s that obviously I didn't hear when it came out, but through the pursuit of listening to from the point of getting into Black Sabbath and then seeking out other things that were from that era that were heavy, you do encounter a lot of things that are pretty good contenders for possibly rivaling some of Black Sabbath's heavier moments, but very few, if any, come close to the song Black Sabbath. I mean, it's dark, it's creepy, scary, heavy. It's actually the negative aspect of the way that the song is constructed. By negative, I mean the notes that aren't played are just as effective as the notes that are. And that's one of the amazing things about the song. But subject matter, I mean, everything about the song is just, it's totally heavy. And the first album what a great statement of intent that is, moving forward. But I don't think anything was. Well, there is one song, my number one. I thought is going to be heavier than that. But number two, definitely Black Sabbath.
Yeah, great pick. I mean, the rain and the bell, the atmosphere of the whole
Yeah.
thing. And just a little editor's note, that song, all these bands that think you have to tune down super, super low to be heavy. Not only is Tony Iommi not tuned down on the first two Black Sabbath albums, the song Black Sabbath is in the key of G, which is from the third fret. He's not even playing the opens. He's not even playing as low as he could. He's playing it higher up on the neck, but it's so ominous. It's all about the space, like you said, Bill's sort of reverby, primitive
Yeah.
tom things that are tribal, like things that are going on there. The use of dynamics. I mean, the verse and the main riff are the same thing. It's just the verse, it's quieter.
Yeah.
The main riff, he throws in a little trill thing, but it's basically the same thing. And it's just the use of dynamics in it. And when the ending of the song kicks in with that triplet, like da 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 da, I mean, how many metal bands have copied that since then? And when people talk about the originators of metal, and you'll hear Deep Purple in rock, Uriah Heep, their first album. You'll hear people throw around Jimi Hendrix or Cream or Blue Cheer, but nobody had that dark, creepy atmosphere the way Black Sabbath had on their album. And to me, that's why they're the kings of heavy metal. That they were able to capture that feeling, that ominous dread of impending doom, scary vibe. There's heavy riffs on In Rock. There's heavy riffs on but there isn't anything as dark as, like you said, is who else was doing anything as dark and as heavy as that at that time. I haven't heard it. So, all right. Unfortunately, after all that praise, that didn't make my list. My number two is Sign of the Southern Cross from Mob Rules. We've talked about how we both love Mob Rules. What an amazing heavy metal album that is. This song is just absolutely killer when everything sort of drops down, and Vinny Appice, I always say this, he's the king of playing slow, simple beats, just boom, crack, boom. And the whole thing just, that there's Geezer's playing like a bass. Here's Geezer again with some other sort of bass effect. Vinny playing really slow. Dio is so dramatic, and the song, just when Iommi's guitar comes crushing in, it's just, man, it's just knocking over mountains. It's just such a massive, heavy song. And just as we're just saying about the song Black Sabbath, this is the same thing, this use of dynamics. So everything drops down low in the verse, and then it just comes crashing in really heavy for the chorus. It's just absolutely amazing. I almost went with Falling Off the Edge of the World for the same reason. It's got that same thing going on. Everything sort of drops down. There's the big heavy drum beat, but I went with Sign of the Southern Cross just because it's so dynamic and so many different things going on in it.
Yeah, it definitely it has kind of the same qualities that we just talked about with Zero the Hero, except the production is a lot cleaner, but it does take you on a murky journey. And I've when we did our Mob Rules podcast, and we talked about the dynamics in the song and how it feels like at one point you're on a ship or a boat, and you're sailing through dark waters with only the moonlight glistening on the waves. It just builds into this atmosphere, and it's really cool when music can take your mind into a different environment, and this song definitely does. It didn't make my list because I thought, well, I mean, it would definitely be my top 10, so it almost made my top 5, but I just thought, well, the dynamics kind of pulled it back a little bit from being consistently heavy. There's when it all builds into the main part of the song, then it comes to complete fruition. But there's that little bit of give and take. Starts off kind of a little bit more, a little quiet, and we've talked about this before with regard to Black Sabbath, how sometimes it's the quiet, or it's the delicate thing that comes before the thing that comes slamming in, that only makes the heavy song that follows even more effective. Well, that's kind of contained in this song as well. But like I said, it didn't make my list, but I agree. It's definitely a heavy tune. So number one for me, and I've referenced this before, as far as like the song that I think rivals anything, and I think you probably know which one it is. The song that rivals anything that's come out ever since, as far as overall heaviness. I mean, I think that it puts to shame anything in the stoner doom genre. I think it's probably heavier than most anything that could be qualified as heavy metal. And the song is called Under the Sun. When that riff, that first riff, it is just crushingly heavy. Crushingly heavy. I mean, and even now I listen to it, and I just bought another version of Volume 4. Rhino Records has done a few different versions of the Sabbath discography, and in particular, their 2011 remaster. Actually, it's not a remaster; it's a reissue. But the guy that pressed these versions did such an amazing job of retaining or in some ways, making the sound of the original tapes really, really full of life, and it sounds really energized. And so I have this recently bought this 2011 Volume 4 on Rhino, and I after so many years, 40 years now, I guess, of listening to Under the Sun, when I put this on a couple of weeks ago, it was just like, wow, this is still like the heaviest song of all time as far as I'm concerned. So when it came time to compiling a list, there was no question about the fact that Under the Sun was going to be at my number one. In fact, thinking about Under the Sun was the reason why I suggested that we do a heaviest Sabbath. I'm like, man, so many things you could say about Black Sabbath. There's so many things that they gave to the world of heavy metal, hard rock, however you want to qualify it. But one thing that's most notable is the fact that they really brought the heavy on these early records, and it continued on throughout everything they would do thereafter, but particularly in the early 70s. And like I said, I guess when we were down lower in the list, I mean, when you start to investigate other things that were coming out, you realize there was a lot of other heavy stuff. But when you're talking about songs like Under the Sun and Black Sabbath, I mean, there really isn't anything that quite competes with those. So yeah, number one for me, Under the Sun from Volume 4.
I had a feeling that was going to be your number one, and I can't argue with that. It's also my number one. I totally agree. We talked about this on our Volume 4 podcast. It's come up in other discussions. For its time, it is just so heavy, and it has such a scary, ominous, creepy vibe to it. The opening, every riff in it is crushing. The opening riff is just monstrous. When it goes into that verse riff, dun, 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 and Bill comes in on the drums, it's just like, oh my gosh, man. And the end of the song, when it's like it's slowing down.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard that, getting it on cassette and hearing that, I was scared. I mean, it just was so evil sounding. Ozzy's vocal delivery in it is the way he's jumping up. I don't want no priest to tell him, jumping up really high in his range. It was just felt so like, I was listening to other heavy things at that time, AC/DC and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and Deep Purple. I didn't discover Uriah Heep till a little bit later, but this was just something different. It had that. It had some sort of atmosphere and mood to it, and the whole Volume 4 album in general, like Iommi's guitar sound, is a little bit cloudy, but it has like, it's a real bass heavy, guitar sound. It's not I wouldn't call it a very bright, album. His guitars are down tuned, it just has a real kind of murky, we use that word in relationship to Born Again. Here it's a little bit clearer on it, but man, it's just such a crushingly heavy song, and crushing in the riffs and just in the mood of the whole thing. It's and from beginning to end, and it's an amazing, fantastic album closer. So when you said this list too, I knew what your number one was going to be, and that was when I put my list. I just put that at number one, and then I started filling in the gaps around it because, yeah, like you said, I mean, by this time, what is Volume 4 is 73,
72.
72.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we didn't have any. Rainbow hasn't even shown up yet. I mean, again, when people talk about other heavy stuff that was going on at the time, it just didn't have the same mood and vibe to it. Nobody was. Ozzy's voice, again, just adds to the whole tone of the whole thing, and just everything about it. It's just a crushing, super heavy song. And here's a challenge. If you want to leave in the comments down below, give us a song from 1972 or earlier that's as heavy as this song. That's not a Black Sabbath song. No, I know, an earlier Black Sabbath song.
72 or earlier. Yeah. I mean,
by the time you get into Judas Priest and Stained Class, and it's starting to get okay. Then I could see making an argument then, but we're 72 and earlier. I don't know if there was anything as heavy as this outside of the world of Black Sabbath.
Yeah, and I think you have to take the whole song into consideration too. Somebody may come in and in some ways, I mean, you could take like either Very Heavy, Very Humble, or self-titled Uriah Heep in the US. Gypsy's a pretty heavy tune, but I don't think that when you factor everything about Under the Sun, it's not just the riff, it's Ozzy, it's the lyrical content, it's the production,
the mood of the whole song.
Yeah, the mood of the whole song and the whole album in general. Even though you have lighter songs like Laguna Sunrise and St. Vitus's Dance, which lightens the mood a little bit, and even Tomorrow's Dream. But overall, within the album, there is like you said murky, and I get that, but to me, there's a lot of, it's almost what I would consider to be unintentional atmosphere, where it feels like it has where some albums, because of the analog nature, have this warmth.
Yeah.
This album seems to have like a coldness to it.
Yeah.
But not in the sense where it's brittle. It still has it's kind of hard to explain, but it still has the richness from analog instruments and analog recording, but there's like a starker, cold atmosphere. At least that's how from the first time I listened to it, that's how it came off to me. When you're talking about, and by contrast, Volume 4 versus like Master of Reality has a warm that feels like not only is there a richness in the tone of the instruments, but it also overall it has kind of a warm feeling. Volume 4 just diminishes that and gets into like this very, like, no other way to describe it for me other than just a coldness, like a cold atmosphere, like you're sitting outside and January day, and it's that that sort of bitter cold type feeling to it, which really adds into the heavy aspect. So yeah, I mean, 72 back, I mean, there's probably some songs that somebody could put in the comments that have heavy riffs, or maybe the vocals, or there's something about it that you could say, oh yeah, you're right, that is heavy, but it is overall doesn't have the complete overall heavy package in the same way that Under the Sun does, and probably doesn't. But yeah, I'd welcome to see some comments, and maybe somebody might find one.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's a challenge out there. There's our picks for our 5 heaviest Black Sabbath songs. Let us know what your picks are for your 5 heaviest. We could have made a list of 10, 15, 20. This was like the Iommi riff thing, I mean, we could have gone way deep with this. So we know there's going to be a lot of other picks out there that people have that didn't make it on our list. So let us know some of your favorite and heaviest Black Sabbath songs. Put it in the comments down below. Make sure you check out our podcast, and we will see you again at the next Sabbath Sunday.